proprietary games and a few dozens of free software games, free games, whatever you want to call them. But among those 1,000 proprietary games, it's possible that only like 10 of them will be exceptionally successful, and 900 of them will be like seriously in losses and not satisfying their shareholders, hopes and stuff. So just the fact that something is free does not in itself mean that it will fail.
No.
Currently, we don't have any exceptionally successful thing that I can, sorry, exceptionally successful game that I can think of which is also free software. However, we do have this in web servers, we have this in browsers, we have this in kernels, we have this in many things. In games, with things like Angry Birds being out there and I don't know, Cut the Rope, none of them is really free software, even in the mobile
I mean,
section of the
that's,
market. So
and that's exactly why I started my little opinion there with in the utility world. And like I say, I try to put the gaming over to a separate group, because I've said for a long time that if we're talking about success, and I was trying to rack my brain while you were talking as to a game which you could mention like Sonic the Hedgehog, but a game from an open source game which everybody recognises the name of, and I can't specifically think of one. And that's not me trying to be facetious. I can't think of one at the moment. But I think games, by their sheer nature, and it's a very transient market as well, because you've got to remember, people will get into a series of games like Mario or Sonic or whatever, and these are very basic examples, but they'll get into them and they'll go out of favour. And then a new franchise will come along. Maybe it'll be Call of Duty, maybe it'll be Grand Theft Auto, maybe it'll be whatever. But they're very fickle, and it's a very transient market. And even with the consoles themselves, there's no loyalty, because when the next console comes along that offers something better, they'll swap brands in a second. There's very few people who will stay loyal to one particular console, not certainly in any great numbers. And I think this is why, certainly in respect of gaming, open source and proprietary, it has to be pushed over into a separate
that
group.
might change. Okay, so you mentioned the
But
80s type of,
but the
you
ecosystem behind it, I mean, the ecosystem behind the whole gaming thing, where you've got a console like a PlayStation, or it doesn't support the idea of open source software.
but I'll tell you why I think that's a misguided explanation of it, in my opinion. You've mentioned things like Sonic the Hedgehog and Mario Brothers series, whatever it is, with the racing or jumping and taking mushrooms, whatever. This goes back to a period which was not only the infancy of free software in the modern stage. Of course, there was free software before. Originally, computers were free software. People were sharing everything. However, it also goes before the age of the World Wide Web. So, for a company that makes machines that are not programmable per se, they have not magnetic tape, and they have just circuits wrapped inside of some plastic. The notion of sharing your source code would be completely dubious and nebulous. Like, there is no World Wide Web. There is no website for a company like Sony, so how do you expect them to publish the source code for Sonic the Hedgehog? Sonic the Hedgehog. Wait, well, that was Mega Drive. Was it a Sony one?
Yeah, I was just giving it. I just threw a
I get
mainstream
confused
example.
here.
I'm just trying to think of a Sony title that sort of known. Sony,
Japanese one, whatever.
Yeah.
But the fact is, those games couldn't really have the source code distributed, because there is. I mean, what are they supposed to do? The form of media back then was like floppy disks and stuff. Are they supposed to give you like a floppy disk with a source code when you buy the cassette or something? It makes no sense. There is no website yet. There's no such thing. So from there we move onwards to like the 90s and whatever, and free software was not very big back then. Netscape was proprietary. Windows was proprietary, OS2 was proprietary, almost everything was proprietary. That was the golden era of proprietarization of software. After back in the 80s, people in like computer labs, such as in MIT, I know of, were starting to kind of turn products into so-called solutions. and there would be no access to, how these things are built. That changes now. IBM has just announced that they call open power, which is a way of just open washing the power infrastructures and architecture. But they start to now market things as this is the open solution. This is supporting lots of different operating systems. You can look inside, you can download schematics maybe, and that's starting to catch on. So I think with games, it's possible some games will try to distinguish themselves by saying like, "Hey, let's collaborate on this development. Create new characters and add them to your game, and maybe we'll put it up to our repository,
But
and
I
and it
mean,
will be the next version."
the and it makes perfect sense what you've just said. But how I saw the gaming market develop was slightly different. I mean, I was lucky enough to be on Micronet. This was way before the World Wide Web. It was a Spectrum 48K service where, with I believe a 300 baud or 900 baud modem, you would connect via dial-up to a thing that resembled something that you see on teletext or CFAX, if anybody remembers the old teletext service on the British TV. That had the facility there. You could actually buy games and you could actually download them. And they had a selection of public domain software for what I say public domain, that's probably the best description of what it was, and shareware titles then. I think what's the reason why proprietary software stayed in the mainstream was because that's what made the money. Because there was no reason for people to give the source code for their latest game because they were selling it to a mainstream who were not
I'll tell
interested.
you why they have no regions. Okay, let's say you got your BBS server. Now, showing you the source code without you being able to exercise the right to change it and to redistribute is kind of futile. You can see how it works, the code, but you probably won't be that interested. Especially won't be interested unless you can contribute and to share the changes, either returning it to the original developer or making your own version. Now, even if you have access to the source code on a BBS server somewhere, how are you going to distribute this to people and do so legally? Now, you might be able to say this is, a better version of it. I removed some of the flaws and the bugs. But how are you going to advertise that? You have no website. There is no such thing as a website. And people are not going to come and download your version. So the incentive to really create your own versions of things is quite low. And even back then, people deal with very small amounts of memory and storage space. So compiling your own program, or especially something like a game, is just it's just a bit unrealistic unless you're like in a research lab somewhere. So it couldn't reflect upon those times and say, well, back then there was no free software, because we kind of know that the internet drove what we now know as this revolution that makes the best browsers, the best web servers, and a lot of the world's infrastructure, the so-called cloud, whatever you want to call it, is very much free software reliant. It's because there is the internet, because there is things like GitHub, and people can collaborate on code and
Yeah, but
pass it around.
again, I think without labouring the point, I think there is a definite line between utility and adapting utilities to your names. For example, BBS stuff. I was trying to remember what software I used when I ran a BBS on the Amiga, and it escapes me what I was using. But it's certainly a public domain BBS server. But I think there is a massive line, and like I say, with the whole gaming industry, because fashion's coming in and out. I say fashion's probably a bad word for the game, but trends come in and out with games. And what might be a hit one week, certainly that genre of game isn't. I mean, we progressed from all sorts of variations of a genre over the years. So I think there's a line. I mean, I would like to see a time when, yes, you would get source code. I mean, I personally wouldn't. If I was going to play a game, I'd play a game. I've got no real interest in modifying it, changing it, or doing anything with it. But I would like to see a time when that's available. I just can't see it.
A lot of the games these days are not starting by writing an engine from scratch,
Mm,
and you can classify different games, like, put them on a scatter map, and say this one is based on the following engine, and this one is
mm,
based on the following engine, and making like